All right, good morning. This is Property Committee, June 6th, and I'll meeting to order and look for approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And that's unanimous. Now we'll move on to our net leasing for historic properties. Andrew.
Awesome.
Soon to be deputy manager.
So at the last meeting, we talked about a lot about the nature and zoning of historic properties, what could and could not be designated. And then we also touched a little bit on like what's the heart of the matter here. And so as a result of that, y'all asked that we investigate into the leasing policy. Could we have a nexus between a local historic designation and different terms that might mirror something of a triple net? And so that's what we'll be reviewing today. So as always, we'll touch on the charge. We'll look at the historic designation across all ACC Gov properties, because if this change was to be adopted, I think it's important to keep in mind how it could be applied to other places in the future. Then we'll look at a little bit about just triple net leasing in general, and then talk about what that could look like in application in the policy should you want to. So going to the next step. Next slide. So we have the charge. It's the same thing that you've seen each time, but if we go to the next slide, what I've infused in here is the committee's request to evaluate that approach as a mechanism. And so we'll be following up. So historic designations locally come in two flavors. You have historic landmarks, which are property specific. So if you think about the act we just did over at Memorial Park with the TB facility, big pink building. It's the unique nature of that building. It's the history of that building that makes it a standalone designation. And so all the documentation is specific to that building, that site. The other flavor that we have that we'll get to in a minute is historic districts. And so that's at the neighborhood or area-wide level. And so it could be that the buildings you own in that area have unique contributions. It could also be that they don't. So in many cases, we actually own vacant land in historic areas and historic districts. And in that case, if we built something there, we would build it with the historic design guidelines in mind, but it by itself would not be naturally of historic value. It would actually, by code, have to be 50 years or more to start to get that, unique property. So looking at, is it possible to move that weird black?
And John's not joining us, so I don't know if it makes it easy just to see.
I mean, we have your right-hand man.
That's right. We don't
John's
need
out.
John today.
Not to go away.
Smaller. There you go.
So when we look at those locally designated historic landmarks, you'll see all of the county facilities that apply have been designated so far, and those would be through Mayor and Commission actions. And so City Hall, the building we're in, and oddly enough, it's friend outside the Double Barrel Cannon, are both unique historic landmarks. What I've highlighted in blue here are historic landmarks that are used by parties other than us. And in this case, they're blue because they're nonprofit occupants. You remember our leasing policy addresses people by somewhat their organizational structure. So whether they're government, quasi-government, for-profit, and then we have other, which for us is predominantly nonprofit. So in that, there's 4 properties. 3 of the 4 we had identified as being a focus area if we were going to be able to fulfill the charge of a sell and roll manner approach. The Welcome Center, though, definitely would fall into that category. So on the next slide, we'll see properties that fall within historic districts. These show, so the district that they fall in are on the left. And here's another, fairly good example. First of all, I want to note that the ones in green are both their boards, authorities, or commissions. So they would fall in our leasing policy as quasi-governmental. And right now, the policy says that those would be addressed on a case-by-case basis. I think there's pretty clear evidence that, in my career, it may check the box, but the College Avenue parking deck right now is not meaningfully contributing to the historic nature of the downtown historic district. And so that is a bit different than those unique landmarks. But we see that there are others that we own, the Morton and Burney building being great examples, that are major contributors to their district. Absent that district, they would certainly qualify to be a locally designated landmark should we have wished to do so. And the bank building is probably another one that is contributing in that nature. Fire Station 3, not. So just wanted to kind of get y'all thinking about that. And then as a reminder, not only is the health department addressed in the leasing policy as quasi-governmental, but there is actually Georgia statute that we are compelled in partnership to provide them with facilities and support. And so this is the facility we actually acknowledged. Long ago, when we had a leasing policy that was more diverse, we actually charged a lease for the space they occupied over in Miriam Moore. They no longer do that lease because we stopped applying a rent to it. So,
Can you remind me of the Burney House building? Which one is that?
so the Burney House building, you would think of it as part of the Morton building.
It's the little next
It's
to
the
the-
little
into the
Yeah.
with the little
Yeah.
balcony.
Yeah.
So it's, okay.
But they are, so it's weird because they're distinct buildings, but as they exist today, you could not separate them.
Okay.
They share common building systems. And so if we wanted to fully use one or sell one, which I'm certainly not proposing that, if you wanted to do that, you would actually have to do major renovation work to divide them as separate buildings. But they do exist as individually platted lots. They just happen to be joint twins at the moment.
Right, okay. That clarifies that.
So in summary, there are four, in the context of outside partner use, there are 4 properties that are historic landmarks. And there are 2 properties that fall in historic districts, both being occupied by quasi-governmental boards, authorities, or commissions, and both not particularly of any historic significance within the district in which they reside. So when we think about a triple net, we have 2 approaches to a triple net. One is what they call a standard triple net. I'm going to call it a triple net like light, or the soft triple net. And so what you typically have in a private transaction that uses this is a lower than what you might call market rate. So let's just use some examples from downtown. Going rate downtown is about $25 a square foot. If somebody's doing a triple net, they might actually be paying 18 to 20 a square foot because they have these other costs that come in. It's basically transferring some responsibility and therefore some risk to the party. But in that, you have common area maintenance, property insurance, and property taxes. When you think about an absolute triple net, this is a much more rigid approach. This tends to be where the landlords maybe aren't as invested in the buildings as they exist anymore. And the big change there is that almost all maintenance and capital is transferred not only through a common area approach, but through a direct responsibility. So an example of common area maintenance would be the landlord provides the mowing, and then they send the bill to the tenant for that service. Under an absolute triple net, what you're more likely to see is there's an expectation in the lease that the tenant provides mowing. And so they control the vendors or the mechanisms as long as they're meeting the standards within that lease. And with an absolute triple net, you then typically see an even more aggressively discounted base lease. So moving to the next slide. This is trying to break down standard leases, what I'm calling, and this actually is pretty closely reflecting what's in our leases that we have with outside partners. And then the standard triple net versus the absolute triple net as it relates to things like responsibilities. So you can see that the common area maintenance, again, being that kind of hybrid of landlord provided, tenant funded. And it becomes very key items, predominantly just the outside of the building and the structural components that the landlord remains responsible for in an absolute model. And the standard model is a mix, but mostly the landlord is responsible for core systems, so plumbing pipes, electrical wires and panels, roofing, HVAC replacement, but then the tenant is responsible for what attaches to those systems or the maintenance of HVAC and that kind of thing. So moving to the next slide, as we look at other things, you'll see similarly, this gets more into the lighter side of buildings, so out of systems and more into services and so on. So the difference is generally these things do live more with the tenants, but the question becomes, are they part of the common area maintenance approach, or is the tenant just told, your problem? It's your parking lot, you pave it, you paint it, you patch it, don't call us. And so that just kind of differentiates the two. And so looking at some of our facilities, what I wanted to bring to you all is some cost analysis of those different approaches. And so what I have here in the top two categories is the average annual maintenance cost as tracked by our central services staff. And so this is equivalent in both an absolute and standard approach. This is things like, replacing a toilet, patching issues in the landscape, contracts like pest control or fire suppression system maintenance. And so in the Brumby House, which houses the Welcome Center, we can see that that has averaged around $11,800 per year. And I'll note that those costs go up every single year, both with the cost of our staff and the cost of our contract. In the bottom, what I'm showing is in our life cycle projections, what are the next 5 years of known needs and their estimated cost, and who would bear that responsibility in these two systems. And so what you'll see is that under a standard approach, if this was applied to the Brumby House, we would not be coordinating interior painting of any nature. So that liability would reside with the tenant or would just go unattended to. But we would do HVAC, the ADA lift, and HV second round. There's different HVAC components. If we looked at the absolute approach, really the only thing that the unified government would remain a commitment to is the ADA lift, because typically an absolute guarantees ADA access into it. And so that, from a tenant's perspective, is two things. One is cost, because these costs, so our HVAC is on a 15-year life cycle. And in a perfect world, we would be setting aside 1/15 of cost for HVAC. We haven't. We've actually got a maintenance backlog. But similarly, a tenant is faced with the same scenario we have, which is you would either have to find this money and replace the equipment, or you have to defer the replacement and risk service interruptions and increasing maintenance costs. And in a little bit, I'll show you what this, well, actually, in the next slide, I'll show you what this actually looks like on an annualized basis. So if you take those specifically the capital cost and break them down. So what I did is took the responsibility and divided it by 5, kind of the average annual value of what you would need to be setting aside or funding to meet those obligations. You can see that under a standard triple net, there would be some responsibilities that average out to the tenant of about $17,600 a year. You can see our own there, and then what happens under an absolute triple net is that more of that average responsibility falls to the tenant. Moving to the next slide, we will look at the Taylor Grady house. Same approach. I'm not going to talk you through all of it. $34,000 a year is our average carry cost just for base maintenance and landscaping on the Taylor Grady house. And most notably, very large capital expenses. It is an antebellum mansion, right? It comes with grown up expenses.
Historic expense.
Antebellum.
Right. And so what you see is in those two systems, those expenses are divided differently depending on what is needed at any given time. Next slide shows the average annual cost. So just as a note, our cost to host the Taylor Grady facility averages out to about $150,000 a year. That's what we're investing so that somebody else can lease it and use it for community values. Under these two approaches, that can be shifted to approximately half or a little more than half, and then less to a third. But again, that's on the assumption that the tenant can and will pick up responsibilities under either one of these triple net models. The next slides, fortunately, are much less in impact. And I do want to note, as I've looked at these facilities, the next two that we're going to talk about are the Town and Gown Theater and Historic Fire Hall number 2. Not as an obligation under their lease, but just as how they've used those facilities, they are much less likely to put in work requests for interior items. And when we walk through the buildings are in good shape, which leads me to believe that they're attending to some of the interior maintenance already, and just trying to, be good partners in that manner, but they're not obligated to do so. So your average carry cost is about $3,900 a year, and our upcoming capital costs are not that big. There are eventually, usually roof is our big driver, and we've done the roofing in recent history. So going to that slide, you can see that from the tenant's perspective, it is actually irrelevant in the next 5 years over which one of the approaches is used. But basically, it would also mean that over the next 5 years, all responsibility would fall to them just because of the nature of those capital items that are coming out. And then last but not least is Historic Fire Hall 2. Similarly, very low cost. In this case, we have dropped the landscaping that we track at that site because, as we talked about previously, it's on the right of way. We're going to do that landscaping no matter what. And so it's not really fair to attribute that to that building. And there is really only some exterior kind of overhaul brick and trim that's coming up in the future. So going to the summary, and over the next 5 years, it also is irrelevant which to apply. It becomes more relevant as things like HVAC come due. So please don't think that this is completely irrelevant. Now, only for the next 5 years is this the same to these two particular facilities. But over a 15 or 20 year period, you will always find that absolute triple net. It's more responsibility and more expensive.
That's a question. This might be redundant. Are we collecting any rent on these buildings?
No. So the rental policy says that our base rent is $6 a square foot, which is already very generous. But then through the items that were adopted by the commission in the last round from GSC, we identified specific performance items, kind of a menu that would demonstrate community benefit. And so that focused around the types of services being offered, best practices for nonprofit management and transparency. And what, kind of pulling the curtain back, in August, you will see a recommendation to renew all nonprofit, well, not all, but all eligible nonprofit leases, and every tenant has qualified for $1. So there really be no change from what's been happening in the interim basis over the previous 6 years.
And that includes the Henderson Avenue.
That's right.
That we looked at. So the criteria of us not feeling like it's as openly known, apparently, for the nonprofit that's in there, as its checklists, that they check the boxes.
Yes, because we had to pick metrics on community benefit that were not as subject to interpretation.
Yeah.
Right? It had to be kind of yes, no type criteria, and so there's a lot of work on that. And so they have provided us with the documentation that they're implementing a lot of those best practices and providing services in a manner that qualifies them for that way.
And on that checklist, just to clarify, because John and I are not in GOC, so Melissa would know more about this, the inner workings there. I feel like there was one round that if the entity as a tenant got money from us in the budget process, that automatically shot them into the $1 a year thing.
That actually
Remember that?
dropped out of it. That
Okay,
did
okay.
used to exist, and that dropped out of the leasing policy. And really where that resolved itself cleanest was in the last leasing policy update. The Mayor and Commission supported clearly identifying quasi-government agencies, specifically boards, authorities, and commissions, is falling into the same treatment as state and federal leases, which is a case-by-case basis. So for example, we do not charge leases to the health department. We do not charge an annual lease to Classic Center Authority. We do net out a lease for downtown parking. It's in the parking management agreement. We do charge a lease to DFACs. Because of the way they're funded, that lease has us basically offset some of the contribution we're going to make anyway to support DFACs. But if they weren't paying it, there would be no direct benefit to our local DFACs agency because it's a state properties item. And then the last but not least is we do charge a lease to the Western Circuit Public Defender. And that's because we actually fund them, but we fund them in partnership with Oconee County. And so by charging a lease that's set at fair market rates, we pick up, don't hold me to it, 60 to 80% of those dollars, and our neighboring county contributes. So while there is a money in, money out component to it, it's basically allowing us to leverage.
Is that the Blasting game or Fort Bentley buildings? Yeah.
Or for college.
Okay, that clarifies it, and it also shows why that topic is so complicated and looped back, 3 times, Melissa? Through committee? Okay.
So some key points. We talked about the difference between historic landmarks and historic districts. I say triple net is really a single net. I mean, you could argue that there's a double net. So I have insurance cost if you'd like to know, but what we don't do is we don't tax ourselves. And we could calculate what the implied tax would be akin to like a payment in lieu of taxes approach. I think what you're going to find is we can do that. We can be as true to market as you would like to be. But the more you do that, the more likely you are to immediately price the tenants out of the building. Within the difference between standard and absolute triple net, it really comes down to ongoing liabilities and responsibilities. I would suggest that if you all found in the charge to move forward and you wanted to do this, that something akin to a standard triple net is a good first step, because it is then transferring those responsibilities for base maintenance and for landscaping, but it also retains what could be a common area approach. So for example, we own one contract for all fire suppression systems in the county. And if that building burns down, it's our problem. And so what we would do there is we would continue to send them the itemized bill for that particular contract. Same thing with pest control. We have other contracts. Also roofing is a common contract for us. And so if the Mayor and Commission move forward with that, we would just have to have very standardized terms. We worked with the attorney's office on to describe what is and is not included in the lease for these entities. And so I think the next slide is getting close to our last slide before some more open discussion. If you were to move forward, I would suggest that you continue to differentiate nonprofits or other entities, as our policy addresses them, differently from for-profit or quasi-governmental, because both for-profit and quasi-governmental are each still unique discussions. And so I don't think it would, frankly, I know the state would push back aggressively if we, they have negotiated the lease for the public defender. If we had our current lease rate and then we said, oh, and by the way, you get maintenance, at that point, they're gonna say, well, we're already paying you for maintenance because we're paying you a fair market rate.
So we're already collecting money. The other ones are not,
That's right.
we're not getting anything.
So sticking with that other tenants only is probably a good start. I would also suggest that pinning it to local historic landmarks rather than historic districts accomplishes a good portion of what you might seek to do. If new situations emerge in the future, that policy could always be revisited. And then I would further recommend, if you move forward, that a standard triple net is the probably more reasonable way to transition into shared responsibilities for the facility while protecting the asset that is owned by the public.
How long are those leases? Are they year to year? Are they 5-year leases?
So they're 1 year, typically with 4 automatic renewals of a year, but I believe all of our lease contracts, almost all of them have a termination of convenience clause that we can choose to not renew or otherwise terminate with appropriate notice.
So, one thing about these historic buildings, they have access to grants, especially through the nonprofits. But the 1-year lease is an impediment to that. So, I mean, I'd be interested in a longer lease period, particularly for these historic structures that have like inherent community benefit just in being there.
Well, that's exactly where we're questioning the same sort of criteria and when you were describing the triple net lease overview and you were comparing some of the, how the market rate rent goes down because of the picking up of some of the maintenance, I was wondering, lease terms, are those also, I guess maybe what we want to learn more about is what would be a lease term, because the feedback I'm hearing as I'm trying to make sure nobody thinks we're trying to sell these out from under these nonprofits but how can I do a fundraiser for the new costs if I don't know if I'm going to be the tenant in a year?
Exactly.
So I guess maybe for the next meeting, guys, could we learn more about how could we pick, how could we pick 3 entities for their lease term to be different? And, is it tied because we're changing the lease? And does that make it still fair and okay? Does that cover?
Yeah,
What you're
part of the goal here is to see to it that these important buildings with historic and cultural value are maintained and accessible to the public for general community benefit, but they're very difficult to maintain and keep up. And so theoretically you have entities who are taking care of that aspect of it, who are qualified and dedicated. So yeah, I mean, I feel it's totally appropriate to treat these designated landmark historic properties differently.
Yeah. So I think that's something we'll certainly look into. I'd also suggest that, because it's a fair I'm concerned, right? I don't want to fundraise for $100,000 roof and you tell me the town sand.
Right.
One workaround could be to levelize that cost and apply it in the lease. So what we say is you're gonna pay not $100,000 as a one-time thing, but your lease is gonna include, we're anticipating $100,000 for a 20-year roof. You're gonna pay us $5,000 a year as a capital contribution. Now, if we do that internally, I think we have an obligation to make sure those things are replaced on time.
See, I don't have a problem with the county picking up expenses like a roof. I mean, we own the building itself is a cultural value. You know, those kind of things that, you know, assure that the structure is intact and protected, you know, like the fire protection. You know, I maybe painting, you know, I have a, you know, that might be something that we could come up with an alternative agreement with tenants about the exterior painting.
Well, that goes, so if we look at the chart, which page, we don't have page numbers?
They do, some of them are hidden.
I'm teasing, but when it's charted, Melissa, it's showing a little bit of the difference.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And I think that's probably why the recommendation is the standard one. If we were to look at those, can you go back to this one,
Yeah.
the one that has
Go to the pile chart.
lease
The
maintenance?
One in the first one.
Yeah, the
Five.
deep dive, is that the one? But, well, there's 2 pages of it, so I think that that's where this differentiation for the standard, if we were to continue to go with more
Yeah,
learning in
right.
that realm,
Mhm.
are you guys agreeable to that versus the more absolute?
Yeah, but one of the things I was gonna say, all right, so you're basing on a 5-year life cycle. So why don't we do 5-year leases? Look at so go to the page that has what the county cost is for each building. So the total cost for the Welcome Center is $46,000. You do a 5-year lease, divide that by 5, and you round it up, it's $38.50 a year, a month. Is what you would charge. That would cover our call, that would cover the maintenance, but we'd also get some money in.
That's right.
Because we're doing a triple net lease, so they're responsible for it.
Right.
And the question is, can these nonprofits afford that? Because like the Taylor Grady House would be $12,000 a month. I don't know if they can afford that.
Mhm.
Yeah, because it's $147,000 for 5 years. If you divide it, no, it's $147,000 a year.
Right.
Divide that by 12, so that's 12.5. But you base it, do a 5-year lease, because that's what you're looking at your placement cost on.
Well, and so that's what these summaries show is, we would not, under traditional, either absolute or standard triple net, we would not suggest that the full 147,000 over the average annual cost over 5 years be transferred to them. You could just say it's all your problem. You're just gonna pay us the carry cost on the building. But if you were to take either the standard or absolute, you would take the same approach. You would just say, here's your monthly cost, and it's a maintenance offset.
Yeah, because we're not getting any rent for the building.
I mean, and
So just split up the maintenance over 5
I mean,
years.
I feel like there's an inherent benefit in having, you know, these nonprofits in the building and running operations and making them available to the public. So, I mean, I would suggest we offer a discount beyond that, you know, cost. So it's almost like we're sharing the.
You could look at the
Unit
cost.
cost as
I mean, what
well.
I was doing was I was just looking at what our total cost is per month.
Sure.
If
Yeah.
you look at what or per year,
Yeah.
if you look at what our cost would be on the standard net, triple net, you know, that's less, and you could divide that by 12. So that's a discounted rate. If you do that, are they still responsible for the maintenance?
So I would suggest no. If they're gonna be paying us on a monthly basis for both the operating maintenance and the capital maintenance, if you take that 65.2 and divide it by 12, I think it would be more or less still the status quo that we're providing the services as requested. They're just offsetting our cost. And again, I think we internally would need, so right now, life cycle items come up. next year's life cycle need is $7 million. The funding is around 3.5 million. Things will be deferred. That's just what happens. What tends to be deferred is first carpet and paint, and then you start to get into, okay, you go into a triage mode. What's your oldest roof? What's your oldest HVAC? Which ones are already having service issues? And so we have items for our tenant spaces that are deferred. If they're paying us every month capital contribution, it sure would not seem fair to defer their items. I think we would almost have to have them first off the top because we've received compensation for those, which we can do. It just makes these discussions around unfunded capital liabilities even more complicated.
Yeah, because, I mean, we want it to continue to have the benefits that we all acknowledge without losing the functionality.
Could we enter a fundraising agreement with those entities to help raise the funds for those kind of big capital needs? I mean, it's a lot easier for a nonprofit to, throw an event or do a fundraising drive for a new roof than it is for a government.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, how would that be appropriate? I'm interested in knowing also how other communities tackle these kind of buildings. What are other arrangements? I mean, every community has historic buildings that are owned by the county.
What happens when I talk about this in like Georgia City County Managers Association, people look at us like we have four heads.
Yeah.
They're like, you do what? You have other parties occupying, it is very unusual that the government acts as a landlord in this capacity.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's either sell it and generate revenue or come up with some kind of lease where we can cover our costs.
Or run the programming ourselves. I guess what a lot of them run programming out of the structures out of the county.
Which would be another cost though, because we'd have to have employees and all that stuff.
Yeah, plus all this
But
figuring
also,
out how to do it.
one of the reasons why we're having this discussion is that these are our properties and the services and the community benefit from them are not really the government's job to do. It's several arms away. I mean, we agree about them, but they're not what the typical property taxpayer is thinking the government should.
I mean, we run
provide.
a zoo. I mean, I've been thinking about this. Like, we run a zoo. I kind of compare that to the same like cultural benefit, but and county employees are running the zoo.
And that's also free.
But it's a cultural benefit, but it's costing us money. So in essence, they're paying for it in their taxes. So the goal of this whole thing was to reduce our costs. So what avenue is the best way? Do we sell the property? Do we create a lease where we generate some income? And that's why I was trying to say, let's look at a triple net or some way to generate some income to offset this. This is just on these four properties, it's $202,000 a year in maintenance over the next 5 years. So if we can cut that in half, we're better off than we were. If we can eliminate it, it'd be great. But I don't think some of these can afford that. I mean, I don't think the Telegradio house could afford $12,000 a month in it.
I would agree.
Well, and the other part of it is that I think that all three of these tenants would appreciate location security. I mean,
Yeah, that's why you do a 5-year lease.
Yeah. And then maybe with the automatic renewal, if we learn more about that, can we go back to the slide that shows, I think it's, expected this one, true.
Like I can see a 50% discount on that.
With a longer lease.
Yeah, so, effectively it's a standard triple net lease, but, the county's taking up half the expense of it because we recognize the general community benefit of those properties being occupied and available to the public.
So would they be responsible for their part of the maintenance then though?
So if you used a standard triple net, I think what we would start to frame out as terms is that they would be responsible for interior maintenance typically. So painting, flooring, plumbing fixture replacement, light fixture replacement. We would take care of, talked about the electrical lines in the building. We would take care of plumbing pipes. On landscaping, that can go either way. Under a standard triple net, it can be a common area maintenance where it's our level of service and we're billing them for the cost. Or you can just say, you're expected to maintain the landscape to this standard and go do it.
I could see expecting them to do the landscaping.
Yeah, because they all don't need the same level of attention.
Correct.
What if we let them be responsible for the maintenance, like in these sheets, like the top boxes, let them be responsible for that, and then the life cycle replacement stuff, that's what we divide over 5 years.
Yeah.
And that is fundamentally what I've tried to show you in the summary slides for standard versus absolute on the annual impact is.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just showing, so when I show $65,000 of tenant impact under a standard triple net over 5 years, so annual cost over 5 years average.
Which
What
one?
I'm not suggesting in that is that we don't have to provide any of those. We can just set expectations that they be done. And frankly, if they don't paint the outside or the inside of the building, in many cases, that's so be it. I mean, we have to make those choices at times. And so you basically are less likely to end up on demolition by neglect. But if we're really worried about demolition by neglect, then it would just be applying this amount and saying it's a standard triple net, but we're still, basically everything is common area maintenance. We're still your.
Well, there is
landlord.
if you switch to a 5-year lease, there is the opportunity when that 5 years is up to say you've not followed through on this exterior maintenance and
Sure.
either pay us and we'll do it.
Have an assessment
or-
or something like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, okay, well, if we go back, John, you still have more questions?
Right, so on the standard triple net in the middle, all the capital stuff is the 82.6, right?
Yeah.
And then what is the maintenance?
So it's about $34,000
Okay.
a year for
For us.
base maintenance and landscaping and repairs.
So that's the divide then.
So that, under either of these models,
Oh,
that annual cost, that's right. The annual cost becomes the responsibility of the tenant for kind of traditional wear and tear.
So what if you took 82.6, whatever, it's,
Yeah,
I just did it.
there it is.
Well, no, divided that by 12, so that's $6,900. And then,
Yeah.
and then they're in charge of the maintenance.
Yeah.
And did a 5-year lease.
Which,
so
I think we're
1,600
close. If you do that, it would actually, so let's stay in the columns for a second. You could do a standard triple net under the green column and say, you're in charge of the maintenance. That 34.2, don't call us. The capital, you could divide and say, you're also responsible for $5,000 a month contribution to us. And we are still responsible for all capital, paint, interior, exterior, parking lot replacement over time, ADA lifts, elevators, roofs, HVAC, so on. That's a clean break because now they're not having to fundraise. And if you wanted to go that rate, what I would actually suggest is instead of taking a 5-year look, we just get all of our life cycle needs and levelize their cost to a per year basis. So for example, it's not fair if somebody has a roof coming in 5 years that they be asked to pay for that over a 5-year span, when the asset is a 20-year plus asset, right? So we could levelize each one of those costs to be proportional to their life cycle. It'll actually, on these big ones, it'll decrease them. On the smaller facilities, that would actually then apply some life cycle costs. I'd be happy to bring you all those numbers, which is the more equitable, or not more equitable, it's the more levelized way to account for
It's
that.
still generating revenue. We're still generating some revenue
That's right.
to help reduce.
Mhm.
So $7 million a year life cycle, it's not just all of our properties, right?
Yes. And that's $7 million next year. On average, we're running about $4 million a year of liability. It just has peaks and valleys.
And we have 3 million put aside every year for it.
We have a little around 3 million in this budget. That's the other thing, is the budget has peaks and valleys. We've needed to balance budgets. There have been years where it's been zeroed out. And that's actually how we've gotten to $7 million numbers and other things. There's been years where we've been more aggressive. And so that's why you hear from the manager's office on things like paving and vehicle replacement and facility replacement. It's got to become a consistent behavior of you're just paying every year.
Versus there being a bucket available to dip into,
Right.
because the need to replace that deferred thing has not.
That's right.
So can you, in the lease, could you put verbiage to tie us to make sure we're doing that? You can't obligate past a 12-month budget, right?
Right.
So they could change it and take it out, but we couldn't put anything in the lease, because my concern is we're taking money in to pay for this stuff, then we don't do it.
Right.
So is there a way to obligate that we've got to do that?
So Courtney, I think right now our leases say that, because we are providing these services, that we will do it at the equivalent kind of standard that we're applying to all county facilities, which means that sometimes they get deferred, sometimes they don't. I've been pretty firm with staff that it needs to be just peer service. If they start paying that, I think one thing we might want to look at is, do we have specific dates by which systems need to be replaced on behalf of the unified government? Somewhat binding up to that action.
So that staff can discuss that kind of thing, and for our next meeting, we could, if we agree that the standard triple net is more detail that we want to keep going, talk about, learn more about a longer lease so that it aligns with potential fundraising that might be needed. And then legally making sure we've got the criteria for these, which brought them to us to begin with, to continue to have a different lease arrangement. My thought if we go back to this triple net lease overview, is that we're talking a good bit about the maintenance and capital line, which is the third part of this. But we haven't talked about the property insurance or the property taxes.
So I actually do have insurance numbers, hot off the presses for you. I'll bring it back in a written format.
Okay.
It was challenging because we insure ourselves with a portfolio of buildings.
We're self-insured.
Right. And so we had to go to the agency and kind of have them break it down by coverage levels and building size. What they reported back is right now we're spending about $6,000 a year to insure the Taylor Grady building. $1,300 a year and change for Fire Hall 2. A little over $1,000 a year for the Welcome Center, and a little less than $700 a year to insure the building on the community theater. If you would like, in the next meeting, I can work with the tax assessor, tax commissioner to tell you what the equivalent tax bills would be if these were for profit. I mean, that may be relevant to you all if you find an avenue.
I don't think that's relevant.
I mean, I think we're getting zero right now, and we're putting money in I don't want to say in a hole, but if we can somehow limit the amount of funds that we're spending on it, and I think like what you said, taxes, I don't think it's going to be, only if we were going to sell the property, what the value would be or what we could generate, but I think we've decided not to sell.
So
Is that?
you're right. So we agree of the three, the triple, we're basically getting it down to two items that we're talking about for further discussion. We want to talk more about property insurance and then the common area maintenance or, right? Because that's under this chart that we're floating towards. But yet, we all agree the property tax pulling that in and trying to charge that
Yeah, I
out
think
is
it's
not relevant.
That's irrelevant.
And then, we might decide the same about the insurance, but if we learn more about that, because I would think if all three of these could have some, I don't know if this matters, very highly visited public, which we want, public
Yeah, it's pretty
interface, I don't know if that makes their insurance rise up higher than a visit to the zoo that's already under leisure services park. I don't know.
Is that just property insurance, or that's not liability too, is it?
It's not liability, it's just property.
I mean, I would assume they have insurance policies.
Yeah.
But they,
themselves.
who covers the liability?
They're required to carry liability insurance
Okay.
as part of the lease.
So that's already their cost,
Mhm.
probably wherever they are. I was at the KACCB meeting, and so that when they do a fundraiser, they've got to make sure that that pop-up event, it's a fundraiser, has the rider. And it's similar to what we're going with the special events.
Mhm.
It's an inherent cost for collecting people on your behalf,
Yeah.
is how I understand it. Is that right, Courtney?
Should we get finance's opinion on if this is I mean, I don't know. Is it gonna be too hard to separate this money out, and where is it gonna go in the, but,
No, that actually is fairly simple.
okay.
So when any money that we receive of this nature right now just hits general fund or
Okay.
other revenues. If we get into the world of portions of capital assets are gonna be paid for, on a levelized basis, and then we're committed to do them on a certain deadline, what we could do is set up our special revenue account where some or all of those payments are set aside specifically for property maintenance. But neither one of those is particularly difficult. It's accounting.
I wonder what their opinion is on selling versus leasing and what we should charge. I mean, I'm sure they say sell it.
I can tell
I
you.
could
there
go
is
there.
reason.
Sell it.
And then going back to the charge, which we still need the
Yeah,
mayor's
clarity.
confirmation as our discussion is, the second part saying a mechanism to return these properties to ACC ownership in the event that the operating, that's just a fallback, but the landmark designation, facade easement necessary to ensure perpetual maintenance. I can't, sorry, I'm reading that. I think the mayor's hope was that it could be transfer ownership, so to speak. So if we're to continue that long-range goal, along with longer leases, can people, what do you call it, when you lease to purchase?
Lease purchase.
Are we able to set up a lease purchase with these three? And is that something we could learn more about?
We're not really building equity though. They're just covering our maintenance,
No, I meant as a separate thing.
I mean,
To help with the long-term commitment.
I'm reluctant to give up public ownership of these, historic cultural structures.
Okay.
What I think probably what happens in other communities is the county operates and owns and staffs these kind of buildings, but there's usually some kind of nonprofit foundation attached to
That's right.
them that, directs the programming or whatever.
Well, then,
Raises
but how do we do that? I mean, that's us asking them to become a foundation, not them as a foundation coming to us.
What is it?
Doesn't that change?
Clarke County Community Fund, what does that fund do?
Like the foundation.
Yeah,
So those are donor directed funds, and so it does a lot, but it's at the,
they make the decision where it's
That's
going,
right.
yeah.
and so.
We couldn't require
What's the title of the foundation?
Clarke County,
Athens Community Foundation.
yeah,
And so they're basically an aggregator of smaller charitable items. So for example, if my family and I wanted to donate $30,000 to $40,000 a year, and maybe we even wanted to endow that, that's great. But the management of that endowment and the oversight of those funds at $30,000 to $40,000 a year net benefit doesn't really warrant having a staff member and an investment advisor and a tax advisor. So what they do is they bring those folks in under one umbrella and share those services amongst the donor directed funds.
or if somebody dies and they say, in lieu of, flowers, please send money
That's
to the
right.
Athens Community Fund. That's what they did when Dad died.
Gotcha.
And when we think about the hybrid nonprofit approach, I would point to what we do at the Nature Center. So many, many years ago, the Nature Center was actually, I believe, even owned and occupied by a nonprofit entity. They could not carry the cost of that building and the operations, and so they transferred it. And I'm sorry, I don't know. I believe it went to the county, or it might have been right around unification. But what ended up happening is we own, operate, and staff the building, and their foundation or their nonprofit stays around and raises money for specific initiatives that they think are worthwhile. So when they did the natural playground and back, their nonprofit really helped to do the fundraising on that. But what they don't do is they don't occupy the building, nor do they really direct the types of programming that's offered. And in other communities, you know, I think about like the city of Jefferson has the
Crawford Lawn.
Thank you, Crawford Lawn. What's more common is that it's not a nonprofit that's in the building. It's a border authority that's in the building. So they might have their equivalent of a DDA or economic development authority, and we've got that. That's much more common than bringing in a nonprofit.
Okay.
Right. Well, do we want to put things on hold till I get the mayor's full feedback?
Yeah, what if he said
Because
was,
Yeah,
we're
right.
doing
he
a lot
wants
of
to
learning
sell it,
here.
we said all this stuff about leases, he's like, y'all need to sell it.
Yeah, I
I
mean, we're
don't
doing,
think that was his intention. I
No.
think that was just like, you know, these
Just
are the
these-
options to discuss. I think he was leaving it up to us, so.
so Andrew, you were taking some notes about some additional things we can learn about, which was insurance
Yeah,
perhaps?
so my notes for future topic would be identify if it's available or how to extend the duration of leases, and that being linked to coming back to you. What I heard today was the most interest was in a standard triple net, if a recommendation is made here. And so being very specific about each property, is it the responsibility of ACC Gov? Would it be proposed as common area maintenance, or would it be the responsibility of the tenant? And then where there are things that are responsibility of ACC Gov, we can give you cost of like annual cost levelized across the asset life.
And that would help us create a rent.
That's right. And then the last thing I had was to give you details on property insurance, not only touching on the cost, our cost, but also the question of does the use or amount of use of the building influence our cost? So, you know, imagine if we had a nonprofit that was flame eaters. Our insurance company might want to have a discussion about what we're paying for the building. I don't know that they've actually ever gotten to that level of specificity, but we're happy to put that out there.
Usually a firing lane or something.
Yeah,
Can
right.
we get this
Extra.
presentation in a PDF? Can you?
Sure, is it on the website?
It's on the website,
Oh,
but I
okay.
can email it to.
Well, and the other thing I wanted to be clear on, because we jumped into, and I understand why that the Welcome Center is back in this discussion, but we had narrowed it, I thought, to be, I was also talking about that Henderson Avenue.
So,
But because, and that kind of goes to the difference in just how is it being used, but the number of people coming and going in the insurance or.
yeah, what I would offer is this. It took us 6 years to land on a lease policy that had defensible basis for why somebody paid the rent they did or did not, really is what it boils down to.
Right.
And so I personally would not advise that we get to identify individual properties that apply different rates without a logical basis for that. And so what y'all identified previously was historic buildings have grown up costs.
Okay.
We want to learn more about that. And because they're not in a district or a local designation, they weren't assessed. And so if you all have ideas on other criteria that you feel like nonprofits need to be assessed by, happy to look at it. But I think we would probably in the policy want a clean break on why was one treated one way and another not.
Well, that's helpful because
we can use the historic as the reason.
That's also why you got information on the Welcome Center in this. But if you pursue the charge, which involves disposition, our recommendation is, and your prior action is no. That's not really part of the discussion. Well, this is a different animal of that discussion, so.
Do we need clarity?
Right,
Sure.
for that, but obviously, if also down the road, the CDB became more responsible for the Welcome Center, it would apply in this mode.
I have it in here. I would suggest to you that if there's clarity on the charge and you all start to have momentum moving forward, it may be worthwhile to have some discussions with tenants before a recommendation comes out. You're not obligated to, but you're gonna hear from them one way or another.
Right.
They already called.
And so that is something you, but I wouldn't suggest doing it now because we don't know what direction the committee's going.
Exactly.
I will point out with the Welcome Center, they do, by prior mayor and commission endorsed agreements, get a portion of the hotel motel tax. And so as our hotel usage goes up every year, the Welcome Center is resourced a bit more every year. That makes me personally, and I think you should ask them, it makes me a little less concerned about their ability of whether or not they can provide some of the maintenance.
Yeah.
And
And this is a fair way to ask them to do it.
Correct.
Yeah.
well, and then does that also stay on there? Like, would we all of a sudden see the hotel motel percentage for the Welcome Center paying for things at the firehouse? Because it's similar occupants.
I'd have to go back and revisit how their funding allocation, I really think it is specific to the Welcome Center because it's a carve out from the CBB allocation. And so to take it out of the fire hall or over to the fire hall, I would argue is probably not consistent with how hotel motel tax should be used. Now, I'm not aware of anybody in our government that's auditing their books for this purpose. So that's
Yeah.
something you could ask them.
Right.
How are you using the money now?
Well, and on that note, how, because it was one of the things that concerned me, if somebody's getting $1 rent from us and then they're subleasing out for money and we're not
Now,
engaged in that, but I have since learned that there is no more community events at the fire hall.
well, we do have a mechanism in the existing policy that addresses that, which is leases over or reuse of the property for fee that exceeds $3,600 a year involves a revenue split. Taylor Grady and Historic Fire Hall 2 are the two facilities that have paid that revenue split.
So,
Remember, we had some.
so, I will again, send a reminder, Thursdays are the mayor's busiest day, so I know that, so tomorrow, and even more so today, he won't be there tonight. But, I'll reach out to him, remind him that he told me his next stop was with you, and so thank you for being here and caught up too, so that when he does, you guys can share, you can represent us in the things that we've talked about, and where we can steer to and what steer away from, because we can quickly start tapping into stuff, like I said, that GOC already covered. And Andrew, you're reminding us to stay to the defined properties and making sure we're not doing anything, leaving out or being overly, I don't know, punitive's not the right word, but once you start asking for money from somebody, they feel it's punitive, but yet we're looking for a solution.
Right. What? So do we have leases, like I'm looking at a lease amendment, Classic Center lease agreement, it has to do with the CVB and how they're getting hotel motel tax because they're under the supervision of the Classic Center.
Okay.
This lease was from 2020. So how long is that lease for?
So with boards, authorities, and commissions, we have historically entered longer term agreements. I believe that when y'all did the arena, they were granted a 50-year lease on the entire facility. And that's because they're an authority. I'm trying to think of it. We'll talk with the attorney's office. There's been a few other cases where we've done different terms, but I think what we want to be sure of is that it's legally defensible if it's going to become the status quo. And then with the library, we actually did, they previously didn't have a lease. We convinced them to have a lease for $1 a year. And really that helps, it helps to protect them. It helps to clarify what we're committed to. It opened the door for us to do some of those landscape renovations out front. And I don't know, I think that's annual renewals. but
Yeah, I think all of those
It's gonna
are.
just run for the rest of the time. Nobody's moving the library out of the library.
Yeah.
But
Patrick might move it to the east side.
Yeah. Well, so that clarifies that, and then again, in dealing with an authority versus a nonprofit is the key again.
That's
And then also revenue sources, identified, and because these are nonprofits, they can raise money. But, again, the charge as called is not talking about us unhousing our current tenants there, but you are right, soon we'll be talking to the tenants or need to in some format to learn their interest instead of us just assuming, that sort of thing. All right. So we will not schedule another meeting until we've gotten more from the mayor. But you also have enough for us to learn from, don't you?
oh yeah,
Okay, but so we'll learn what we've talked about from what we've talked about. We'll get the mayor to give us a focused charge or adjusted charge. And then I'll be reaching out for us to nail down a date
Okay.
for that. And I will we will honor the July off part, so it'll be August. And then I've got a block of time on that at 10 minutes. But anyway, so motion to adjourn,
So move.
Second.
all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
We're done.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
And,